Okay. So we are recording, and that means that we are good to go. So give me one more minute to get on the proper screen. And what I would like to share with you, we've got, hold on just a minute, we have more people waiting. This is something that is relatively new. Robert Schultheis. Tuck Grinnell, are you with us? That seems to be cleaned out here. Here's another, so be patient, thank you. Okay, so let me just give a few introductory remarks here with regard to the folks that are with us. We welcome you to this program, and the panelists that will be sharing the question of race superiority and fascism. Is fascism a threat in and to the United States? And we're going to be exploring to some extent the connection of our racial problem here in the US. I am Father Bob Bono, and as Executive Director of the Association of US Catholic Priests, I'm happy to welcome you. Our panelists today include myself, include Dan Divis, who will be serving as our MC. He will be introducing then the panelists who will be sharing great information with us about the question. Dr. Joe Torma, who is a retired professor of theology and director of the Institute for Justice and Peace at Walsh University in North Canton, Ohio. Dr. Joe Holland is a retired professor of philosophy, religion, and law at St. Thomas University in Miami Gardens, Florida. He's also president of Pax Romana. Father Mike Gillgannon is a priest of the Diocese of Kansas City, St. Joseph in Missouri, who served as a missionary in Bolivia for 39 years. So I thank you all for your cooperation. I may have failed to say that Dan Divis is a priest of Cleveland, Ohio. And so at this point, I stop the screen share and turn the program over to Dan.
Thanks, Bob. Well, you know what our title is, and so I'd like to begin with a prayer, and we're using the prayer that Pope Francis wrote, and then we can find at the end of his latest encyclical, which is very opportunistic for us heading today. So let us pray. Lord, Father of our human family, you created all human beings equal in dignity. Pour forth into our hearts a fraternal spirit and inspire in us a dream of renewed encounter, dialogue, justice, and peace. Move us to create healthier societies and a more dignified world, a world without hunger, poverty, violence, or war. May our hearts be open to all the peoples and nations of the earth. May we recognize the goodness and beauty that you have sown in each of us, and thus forge bonds of unity, common projects, and shared dreams. Amen.
Amen.
So now to begin, Bob, I'd like to come back to you, and if you would just tell us, why is the Association of United States Catholic Priests dealing with this issue of fascism?
Years ago, in the second assembly, actually, of the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests, I had the pleasure of sitting next to Mike Gillgannon, the key member, in a certain sense, who provoked all this. And more recently, Mike and I had conversations over the phone, and he was telling me about his increasing anxiety about what he sees as tendencies toward fascism or threats of fascism in our own culture. And I encouraged Mike to share his experience about that. And he wrote 2 different bulletins for us, which have been published. I think all of you should have received them with the notice of this webinar, and we'll be making them available again afterwards as well. So his concern is that this is something that he sees as very disturbing and a threat to us here in the United States. And then I saw this screen of Madeleine Albright's book, which for me, I had a respect for Madeleine Albright as a former Secretary of State for our nation, very internationally known. And she published this book in 2018, Fascism, A Warning. Now, she doesn't really talk specifically in her book about the situation in the United States, but I saw that as, wow, what's this all about? And I needed to begin to try to learn and understand. So that's kind of how I got into this, through Mike Gillgannon. And in talking with Mike, it seemed that it would be a worthwhile webinar. I read a lot of different articles, and I came across a number of videos that were clearly informative about this situation that we have. So what I want to do at this point, and I'm having, here we go. Okay, so I am going to bring to you here, give me one moment, please. Okay, this is a brief video by a professor of modern and contemporary history. He's British in a British university. So let's see what he has to say about fascism.
It's hard to believe it, but fascism is almost 100 years old. In March 1919, in a small square of Milan, a relatively unknown political maverick called Benito Mussolini addressed a small crowd of his fervent supporters. That was the moment that fascism was born, as a movement and also as a word in our political vocabulary. Within less than 4 years, fascism was in power, and Mussolini was a prime minister of one of the major countries in Europe and one of the guarantors of peace after the First World War. Fascism became a real child prodigy of radical ideologies in the 20th century within such a short period of time. Imagine this really successful political formula. Love your country first, love it more than others, love it more than anybody else. Believe that your country is superior to anyone else. Fear and loathe the perceived enemies of that country. And be ready, prepared, committed to act in defense of what you see as national interest, no matter what kind of political, legal, or indeed moral barriers may exist in your way. Fascism spread fast across Europe, and it was a coalition of fascists, not only from Italy and Germany, but also later from other countries, such as Romania and Hungary, that plunged Europe and then the world into a major military conflict. They were also responsible for one of the greatest atrocities in history, the final solution called the Holocaust. 1945 marked the end of that chapter in the history of the world. Countless people who grew up after 1945 were told that fascism has been defeated once and for all, and it was not coming back. Yes, there would be challenges to democracy, but nothing like fascism would ever be able to make a comeback. Fascism had its time, we were told. The great Italian philosopher Umberto Eco believed that there exists a kind of fascism that is not tied to any particular historical period or indeed any country. He called that kind of fascism ur-fascism. And for him, that fascism exists all the time, anywhere, even in our days, sometimes even in plain clothes. Its core ideas, extreme nationalism, demonization of the perceived enemies of the nation, cult of activism, and above all perhaps this kind of belief that violence is justified when used in the defense of that nation. All these ideas did not die in 1945. If anything, they're making a strange comeback in our days, perhaps waiting for another radical political movement or some kind of maverick politician to manipulate them and turn them into a mass ideology once again. Umberto Eco reminds us that ur-fascism can come back under the most innocent of disguises. It is our duty to uncover it and point our finger at any of its new instances, every day, in every part of the world.
Whoa, Bob, that's a little scary. So what do you hope we're going to accomplish here today?
Well, my hope is that this will help us think about and learn more about fascism, how it takes hold, how it connects with our current US struggle with racism and white superiority, and especially that against the background of the administration's response and behavior and threats that are around. And Mike Gillgannon kind of introduced me to that, Gillgannon, and so I'm looking forward to what he'll have to share with us today.
All right, then I'd like to start with Joe Torma, if you could expand on this whole concept of fascism and how you see it today. You got to unmute him.
Joe Torma, unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Now you're fine.
Okay. Are we going to have the Merriam-Webster definition up so folks can see it?
Yes, I can do that. If you're ready for that, we can get that up in just a moment. So give me a minute to get there, Joe. You can begin your conversation and I'll get this up there. Here we go. This is what I think you want. Go ahead and start talking, Joe, and I'll get this here for you.
Okay. Well,
there you go.
Okay, well, that's my definition. Did you want to put the Merriam-Webster up first or no?
That is the Merriam-Webster there.
Oh, you're right. My mistake. Sorry. Yeah, I'm definition 2. Okay. When I look at the definition of fascism, and I'm looking at it through the lens of Catholic social teaching because that's what I specialized in, I recognize a definition that is applicable to more than movements such as Mussolini and Hitler, because as the professor said, this is he's quoting Umberto Eco. There's war fascism. So I see that these definitions, this definition, which is basically has the 3 components of nationalism, dictatorship, and violence, as being things that are going on all the time. But there is a specific way of looking at that reality, which is a little more complex. And so you mentioned that you were going to use the Wilkerson video, which I would find that helpful. And then if you use that, then I will come in and unpack it even more.
So we have some misunderstanding there, Joe. There is no Wilkerson video
okay,
that I have.
Right.
It's a different one. Okay. Yes.
Well, whichever one it is, whoever it is.
Yes. Okay. So here we go. I have to close that and get into this other one. And be patient with me. I keep having to make sure I'm getting to the right thing because I get very confused at times. So yes, here we go. All right.
As far as political ideologies go, none is more universally reviled than fascism. Although the movement was only in effect for a short while in a select few countries, its repercussions are still felt to this day. So what exactly is fascism? Essentially, fascism was born out of the idea that rational egalitarian democracies would ultimately lead to severe crisis and weakness. Around the late 1800s, a more irrational and emotional structure based on social Darwinism began to overtake the idea that people should have equality. Instead, fascism promised to create the rebirth of a new, stronger, and greater society stripped of all its weaknesses. Some point to Italian writer and poet Gabriele D'Annunzio as the originator of this ideology. During the 1930s and 40s, it saw significant influence, first in Italy, then in Germany, and finally Japan, although a large number of countries borrowed the ideology around the same time. In effect, fascism operates under a strict doctrine. First off, it attempts to unify countries under a single genetic banner. Often, this nationalism includes the concept of racial or cultural purity as a method of weeding out weakness. Hitler used this to paint Jews and other groups as not being part of a pure Aryan race, and thus worthy of being eliminated. Second is the total control of society and people by the state, called totalitarianism. Citizens are expected to have unwavering faith in a single party ruling elite, in nearly all cases, a dictator. It is intended to directly oppose pluralism, which is the ability of multiple parties to compete for power. Economically, fascism seeks to solve the problems of materialist capitalism and Marxist socialism. In practice, countries did this by promoting private enterprise and handsomely rewarding successful businessmen while abolishing unions. However, the state would only allow businesses which served and promoted the national interest. They also sought to ban foreign trade to avoid becoming dependent on any other country. The end goal is to become fully self-sufficient and to be able to allocate significant resources towards the military. Fascism is also intensely supportive of violence to achieve political means. That specifically includes removing weak people from the fascist state, either by executing or deporting them, all through strict social laws enforced by a violent police army. In the 30s, these were Hitler's brown shirts and Mussolini's black shirts. Finally, as a social ideology, fascism promotes youth and revolution, with a particular focus on strengthening desirable and supposedly moral characteristics.
So we're going to end it at that point.
Okay, would you put my definition up then?
Give me 1 minute. You can start talking and it'll be there as soon as I am able to get definition 2 up, Joe. There you are. You there, Joe? Joe?
Looks like Joe froze.
Oh my.
Well, maybe we can come back to him right now, and I'll ask Mike to give a little reflection on his experiences in South America. Mike Gillgannon. We got to unmute him wherever he is. There he is. He's muted.
Yeah, Mike, Mike, you know how to unmute. Go ahead, I'll try to find you. Mike Gillgannon, unmute yourself.
Uh-oh.
He knows how to do it, so let's be patient.
Yeah.
We have, yes. Mike, unmute. You have to unmute.
Hello?
There you are.
Okay, there you go, Mike. Yes, would you mind if you would share some of your experiences with us now?
Well, I was the national secretary for some years of the reorganized Catholic Campus Ministry Association after Vatican II in 1966, 67. I was on the Bishops' Committee for organizing because I was here at the University of Missouri in Kansas City. I finished that and was always interested in our mission, which we had as a diocese in Bolivia. So I went to Bolivia in 1974 for the mission, and I began to understand the problems of fascism in Latin America because General Banzer had developed a program, a very strong program for the fascist control of Bolivia by the military before I got there in 1970. He continued that through the 70s. I got there in 1974, and then we continued with some other generals after that. But the problems we were talking about here and the things that I have seen since I've been back in this country, in the United States, for 8 years, is the weakening of the democratic process and the fractioning of people by fear and by such things as the alternate truths, the idea that also we have news agencies which are totally separate and very politicized beyond professional news gathering. And so the people are fearful. There are problems. And I began to say, I think the United States is getting dangerously close to that kind of division that was mentioned in the clip we just had. You are deliberately in fascist ideology and in the playbook trying to take advantage of the fears that people have. So Mussolini and Hitler had the post-war breakup of the national control by both Germany and Italy after the war. They lost the First World War. And they brought to their people, well, they don't care about us out there in the wider world. And England and the United States, they don't care about us. There was no Marshall Plan, a big mistake made in the 1920s. We didn't help them rebuild. They had to do it on their own, and they were prostrate because of the disaster of the First World War. So Hitler comes in the early 1920s, right after the war, and says, we are a great people. Well, of course, Germany really was always a great leader of European art and culture and philosophy. And so he picked up on that. And Mussolini did the same thing, of course, in Italy. And they said, well, we are, yes, beaten at the moment, but we are a great people. And we will now pull together to make sure that we can pull our country back together. But the upshot of that is, in order to do that, if anybody gets in the way, they are an obstacle and they will be eliminated by force. And so you have the fascist black shirts and brown shirts and the bully boys, and so that's when I began to see and talk with Bob and other friends. Bob, I've seen this before in Latin America. The United States is breaking up into little groups. The little groups are brought together deliberately. And then there are news agencies that divide them. And there are also the problems that the political parties are themselves struggling to maintain their participation and their memberships, except at the highest level of money. So the Democratic and Republican parties become the parties of big finance on both sides. Big problems of what do we really stand for? What are we really going to change in the society if we are elected? So as I saw that happening, I got back in the country then after almost 40 years in Bolivia. I had been, by reason of my work, in most all of the countries of Latin America. I had talked with missioners, I had talked with philosophers and theologians. I had become the director of campus ministry for the largest university in Bolivia because of my experience. And I was also a friend of a number of people who were trying to, some Jesuit friends and others, trying to help people, both the poorest of the poor, as well as the university level people, to see how can you build your own democracy that is really yours. Well, Bolivia was, like all the countries of Latin America, a kind of laboratory of the CIA. So that the CIA hit upon the fact that Nazi refugees were in Latin America because of many German immigration groups all over Latin America, and they began to be seeking their freedom to work in Argentina, Brazil, and the other countries. Well, what happened was you had leaders like Klaus Altmann that you can look up for Bolivia, who then, having been also called the Butcher of Leon, and was eventually taken back there for war crimes, he became the voice, or I should say the tutor, of the Bolivian army. And the Bolivian second and third generation German immigrants were some of the leaders of that army, and they were well educated. Well, the same thing was true in Brazil and in Argentina and in Peru and elsewhere and in Chile. So in other words, that's what we saw. The German Nazis were then more or less turned loose by the CIA of the United States in Latin American countries to do whatever they wanted to do to not only have their freedom, but to do whatever work they were going to do because they could help the Bolivians and the Brazilians and the Argentinians organize fascism and military control of people because they too were anti-communist. So the CIA and the intelligence services of the United States, besides being very interested in the industrial development of Latin America for American interests, were also interested in those Nazis taking the place of leadership and organization because they really knew their work. They were professionals, they were good. Well, they were in Brazil, they were in Peru, they were in Chile, all over. They were in Argentina and they were in Bolivia. Well, that's what I found when I got there. The military was really tutored by Klaus Barbie, and the military had taken over control in a coup in Bolivia before I got there, and then lost it, or decided maybe we've got enough control, we can turn it over. They gave it up for 2 years while I was there in 1977, 78, 79. And then another group of military decided to come back in because things were going badly on the organizational level in the country, and said, democracy's not working, we'll take it back. And that's when they started the 1980 coup, which was the most brutal in Bolivian history that we got into. It was terrible. It's in my autobiography, my memoir, Padre Miguel, where I speak somewhat of those days in Bolivia. Well, that was the background. In other words, the Nazis of the fascists of Italy and of Germany were the military leaders and intelligent directors of the organization of Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, Peru, Chile, all of the people who were the fascist generals saying, we must stamp out the communists. And the United States, in the State Department, but also in the CIA, basically saying, let them go. Let's let the fascists do it. They, first of all, can organize the armies and the police force. That's what we need. But we don't want to do it. We want them to do it. So we've got the Nazis in Latin America fighting the communists in Latin America because we hadn't really developed a working democracy in Latin America, partly because American interests had in fact taken over from colonial Spain to say, okay, we've got the Spanish out from Cuba on south, and now we can work our own way into the resources of Latin America, like the gas and oil and coal and the various things that became the source of wealth for many, many people, unfortunately not many Latin Americans, out of American business interests. And I don't say that cynical or to be anti-American. I say that's the historical reality. And that's what we have to think about when we look at what's happening. When I came back in 2012 in the United States, I couldn't believe, well, I knew the problems. As the National Secretary for Catholic Campus Ministry Association and the planning organizing group of the Bishops' Conference, to get that group started, I knew what was behind the American universities and the problems of Kent State. If the United States National Guard can be sent out to kill Kent State students, as I saw in 1973, I said, uh-oh, where is this country going? Well, that was what really put the actual blinders on everybody to say, well, those kids are out of line and we've got to take care of them. But if anybody else gets out of line, you see what we did with the students at Kent State. It could happen in Missouri or Alabama or Michigan or wherever. Don't get that far out of line, because we are all about peace and justice. That's the cynicism that I have seen since I decided in the 70s to do what I always wanted to do, to go to the mission and see the people of Latin America. I really got an education. I had a background. I had a master's program in philosophy. I knew about some of those things. I never saw the civil and political practice of it as I did when I got to Bolivia. So that's all in my book, which is called Padre Miguel. I just decided, well, I write it up for the people that we worked with and to let people know how far those people came, the wonderful Bolivian people, from the poverty that they had to what now I have, and that's another article I put in my Facebook page. The change that occurred from the time that I went there in the 70s and 80s. Latin America is no longer peasants out in the countryside. The urban migration has taken made some of the largest cities in the world, Sao Paulo, Rio. Bolivia, La Paz, when I got there, was 300,000 people. It is now in its composite of two cities, one on top of each other at 13,000 feet. 2 million people. That's all over Latin America. That's the future, not only of Latin America, but of Africa and Asia. And it is caught with outdated and deadly old European philosophies like fascism and like total control systems. And democracy is, in this country, to my way of looking at it, having been very involved before in social justice issues in the United States, become a money game. If you have more television ads, then you can talk about freedom and you can talk about the poor. And you can talk about anything you want to and show pictures of it. You don't have to do it if you ever get elected, because the money's in the television and the ads. It's not in the real development. And those who know me know I'm not only not cynical, I really, if you got to know me, we could tell funny stories to each other. But the story I'm telling is a horror story that I lived. I know what I'm talking about.
Mike, could you take that story from the history of where you've been to, like, say, what happened in Portland? How the images of that seem to resonate with me like it's the same thing.
That is exactly what I was going to take as the last point here. I just wanted to mention, when I saw what was happening when I got back about the poverty of the parties, both parties, that is, the lack of really new ideas, the standing together, let's make America great again. And it's not, the same degree in both parties, but we're the richest, most powerful nation in the world, almost by right. And we don't have to care about the rest of the world in a good sense. Granted that this administration has broken the international ties that other administrations had built up. But in the sense of what happened in Portland and in Minneapolis, that only pressed me to talk with Bob Bonnet and the others friends to say, I see it happening here. Don't you realize it's right in front of us? nobody, none of the people who were driving the black cars in Portland had any uniforms or any connection with the military or with the police. They had black overcoats, no badges, and they were driving black cars. And you're looking at, I was looking at it, in the one of the terrific moments of upset in Bolivia, the national police used ambulances to go out and pick up people. So when I saw the black cars unmarked in Portland, I'm saying, oh my gosh, it can't happen here. I hope to God it never does, but it's coming.
Well, thanks. I don't know, this is really scary stuff. It's very scary stuff. And having lived through that and you see the experiences happening again, it's even got to be pretty traumatic for you, as you can see it building up. And it's a question of what the heck can we do about this? So that's why, Joe, Holland, could you tell us about this neo-fascism concept too? I mean, I can't get my head around that one. I got fascism, but what's neo-fascism? You got to unmute yourself first.
Okay, am I on, Dan?
You're on, thank you.
All right, great. Before I begin, I just wanted, Mike referred to his biography. This is anybody, Padre Miguel, it's called, published by Pachman Terrace Press, which is the publishing arm of my organization. So I want to recommend it. It's a wonderful read. And also I want to thank Bob for inviting me. It's a real honor to be part of the Association of U.S. Chicago Priests. I spent first 5 years of my working life as a diocesan priest in Bridgeport, Connecticut, working with Hispanic communities and also in Puerto Rico. And because of that experience, I wound up later spending lots of time in Latin America, including for about 15 years during the summers with Mike giving seminars and stuff in Bolivia and Peru as well. But neo-fascism, I think, is distinguished by its increasing sophistication in the means of communication. It's in the wake of the electronic revolution. Classical fascism was before the electronic revolution. Neo-fascism is after. And we could spend a lot of time talking about it, but I just like to spend a little more time just saying similarly, what I saw living in Chile also, as Mike did. I lived in Chile during the last year of the Allende government. My wife Paquita and I lived there, and watched the buildup for the coup d'etat against launched by the United States through the Chilean military. And then secondly, say some things about the wider social analysis that is making it a proto-fascist situation. What's really happening in the world today and in the United States. When we lived in Chile, I had a Fulbright to study Marxism and Christianity. I was studying at the University of Chicago at that time, and I had a Fulbright in sociology down there. But I spent most of my time at the Centro Bellarmino, which was the Jesuits think tank, which is the most prominent Jesuit think tank in all of Latin America and one of the extremely prominent ones in the world, sort of like Acción Popular in Paris. And learned a great deal about the interaction between Marxism and Christianity, but also the rise of the new right, particularly an organization, a fascist organization of young people there that was called Patria y Libertad, Fatherland and Freedom. And I won't go into all of it, but the two things that struck me as very similar. I watched the intensifying polarization, driven in part by media, not quite so electronic at that time, and the bitter hatred that the right was fomenting, for hatred. So you see this deep polarization of hatred, and it isn't happening by accident. It's being programmed by propaganda, and propaganda is very effective. When Donald Trump says something, he says, "Well, I think this is what's going on," and then he says, "This is what I think is going on, and I think this is going on." When you do that in propaganda, it creates a neural pathway in your brain, and you get enough of those neural pathways around, and your brain begins to think that's the real world. Those things that have become embedded in neural pathways in your brain, you begin to use that as your frame of reference for perceiving reality. And it works. And so a lot could be studied about the study of about propaganda, which is closely related to advertising and marketing. It's the same principles as well, how to persuade the consciousness to do something that probably otherwise it would not do. And it's been eminently successful in dividing the American population. And as Mike said, also the media dividing into right and left, and in fact, neither side building bridges among people, and neither side telling you what's really happening behind the scenes at the deep level. And certainly on the left is not really the left, I don't think. It's MSNBC is owned by Comcast. If Comcast is some kind of left institution, I mean, then heaven is and hell are reversed. Comcast has no interest in the boards of directors, the board of directors, no interest in the left, just the opposite. But it makes money off the left, but also, even more importantly, it's able to reciprocate the hatred from the right with Fox News and all the other groups and stir that up on the left, and then they begin to fight and hate each other, you know. And they all focus on Donald Trump. It's so much bigger than Donald Trump. Donald Trump could disappear tomorrow. I call him the distractor in chief. It's the real things are going on behind the scenes, not with him. But all the energy can be absorbed in him and become psychologically obsessive, almost addictive. And that's again, the propaganda. But that division and hatred is so destructive for the long run. And it sets the stage then to destabilize everything and make a big move for violent coup d'etat or golpe de estado afterwards at some point, which could indeed happen. And the other is the violence, particularly among young males. And that's what Patria Libertad was. I almost got beaten up once, got surrounded with guys, all these clubs, and they were going to beat me. And I put on my most extreme American accent in Spanish and pretended to be a turista and told them that I liked their banderas, their flags and stuff. And a few other people came to my aid, and they were, I guess, convinced I was just some goofy tourist standing there, and they didn't kill me, which they were quite capable of doing. Anyway, what is happening now? I think the first thing to understand is that, and I won't have time to get into this, but in my view, we're at the end of the long cycle of 500 years of modernity, which has been a humongously colonialist and oppressive process to conquer the entire earth and to conquer nature. It is now breaking down ecologically, it's breaking down sociologically, and it's breaking down theologically. It's at the deepest level, I think it's a spiritual crisis. And the Western spiritual tradition, mediated through Catholicism and Protestantism, is just collapsing. It's collapsed first into privatization, and then to secularization, and now into nihilism. It's not sustainable, the modern form of Christian spirituality. We have to go back and tap much deeper into ancient forms and then integrate that with new ecological spirituality. But that would be a whole different story. The thing I want to stress just for here, why fascism becomes important in the world, Oxfam in 2017 published a report about concentration of wealth in the world. That's what we're seeing, massive concentration of wealth across the planet, taking it from the earth and destroying the reproductive capacity of the earth, but also taking it from communities of people and just sucking the life out of them to amplify its capital. And here, this is just an astounding figure, according to Oxfam's research. In 2010, 388 individuals had as much wealth as the poorest half of the earth. 388. 1 year later, 177 had as much wealth as the half of the earth in 2011. The next year, in 2012, 159 had as much wealth as the bottom half of the earth. In 2014, it went down to only 92 people had as much wealth as the bottom of the earth. And in 2015, only 8 people on planet Earth owned as much wealth as the entire half of the population of planet Earth. Absolutely astounding. Wealth is being enormously concentrated in a new super billionaire class all over. And Trump is just a front man for these guys. These people do not believe in democracy. There's no way they could continue to, and they're making a fortune all the time. The worse COVID gets, they've colonized the healthcare system. They want to colonize the educational system. They also colonized a number of Catholic universities, by the way, and other universities that support them. So this is the colossal thing. I just wanted to share with you now, give you some, and there won't be time to go into this, but I prepared a little document that I think Bob will be able to circulate to everybody afterwards. I'll hold it up. But there's a number of books here that I would recommend. You can't understand what's going on just by watching the media and reading the papers. The first one, about 5 of them, I'll just mention them quickly. This is one that Mike kept mentioning when we were planning this. Sinclair Lewis is written in 1935. It can't happen here, fascism. It almost did. Most of the elite of the United States, the business elites, were in favor of fascism. They had an attempted coup d'etat to overthrow Franklin Delano Roosevelt, led by General Smedley, retired general of the commandant of the United States Marine Corps. Roosevelt wouldn't let it go public because he thought it would destroy the country. Secondly, a book, Anointed by Oil, by Canadian historian, Anointed with Oil, Canadian historian from Notre Dame. It's a huge book, humongous, you can see, but astounding. How Christianity and crude, and it's not Christianity, it's really evangelical Protestantism, how evangelical Protestantism and crude oil, I would say, made modern America. Evangelical Protestantism grew up hand in hand with the oil wildcatters, not with the big oil people like Rockefeller who were linked to the Protestant social gospel, but the wildcatters. And they were in the South and they moved to the West also. And when the aerospace industry and everything opened up in the West out of World War II, they moved out there. But the West, the Southwest particularly, the new politics that we saw triumph with Ronald Reagan, was a product of the South and had relocated. That brings me to a second book. I'm just going to recommend you read all these books. We won't have time to get into them though. This wonderful book by a historian from Boston College, another college, by the way, a Catholic college, by the way, Heather Cox Richardson, How the South Won the Civil War. And what she argues is that they took over the West and the South, and that politics, linked to oil, of course, control pretty much of the Republican Party and of the media systems as well. And they established a tremendous base, beginning with Goldwater and building up to the triumph of Reagan, and then expanding on from there. The third one is not an academic scholar. He's a journalist, and he doesn't do a deep analysis, but it's marvelous. He takes all the things that we know from that happened from 1970, Evil Geniuses, The Unmaking of America by Kurt Anderson, and shows how, in fact, both in the Republican and the Democratic parties, they made moves that would cripple the labor force, because the only way capital can triumph is if you eliminate unions. Hitler never won over the business elites until he promised to destroy the unions, and he immediately arrested all the labor unions leaders, and they jumped on board. You know, once you move labor away, then capital is free, and capital does not promote life on planet Earth. Believe me, not ecologically, not sociologically, and not theologically. So this is a very dramatic book because it builds on all the memories we will have and facts, but it puts together all the pieces and shows this massive effort to actually re-engineer the nature of the United States and put all the power in the hands of very few people, while manipulating others through mass media and playing with them, and through propaganda and getting them all hyped up. And meanwhile, the progressive liberalism was completely out of touch with what was going on. And the Catholic Church also had a revolution internally. It was re-engineered and redesigned. I say we used to have 200 labor schools before World War II, and we had 200 business schools that were anti-labor after World War II. So it was a huge transformation. The last thing I would say, just very quickly, about Catholic social teaching, I believe the Holy Spirit does exist. And I believe the Holy Spirit has been using Catholic social teaching, despite all the corruption and the incompetence and so on and so on, to point toward a pathway, not perfectly. But before John the 23rd, well, actually before Leo the 13th, the papacy was completely opposed to the modern world. You know, that famous syllabus of errors of Pius IX. Leo does a new strategic turn. He says, we are now faced with an entirely different situation. We have these modern industrial ideologies, liberalism and Marxism arising, and we will fight against Marxism, and we will reform liberalism through Thomist philosophy and a regulatory state and labor unions, and we'll reform it. But it would be conditioned on the success of the regulatory state and of the labor unions would be conditioned on reforming the philosophy of liberalism. That failed. Thomism never succeeded in reforming the philosophical ground. Into that came even worse demons still. Beginning with John the 23rd after the Cuban Missile Crisis, he saw that these two superpowers of the two competing ideologies jointly almost destroyed most of life on planet Earth through thermonuclear war. He knew that the Leonine game was over. You couldn't reform modern ideologies, be them liberalism or capitalism. A new civilization had to be created. And that began to unfold slowly with Paul VI. They were a little optimistic in the beginning. John Paul II, for all his problems, he understood that deeply. He had lived through Nazism and communism. He pointed out the negative side, the culture of death, which was much more than abortion. It was death dealing to the entire living system, he realized. And the only one, though, who finally breaks through in that now, finally, in a successful communicative manner, is Pope Francis with Laudato Si. And now with Fratelli Tutti, that should be Fratelli Sorelle Tutti, it should be both sisters and brothers. Nonetheless, this is a cri de coeur on his part. Really, the civilization is breaking down, and it's killing people, and it's killing the earth. And he gives a 83-page sermon. It's unbelievable. This is something very different than anything ever before in Catholic social teaching. That about we're in the middle of an enormous collapse that is death dealing all over. And how do we begin to rebuild? He doesn't really have an answer, but he really wants to put that on the table. I'll stop there, Bob, and that's and these books will be. You don't have to write them down, but Bob will send you the link to all of them later. Yeah.
Joe, that was fantastic, overwhelming, lots of information, and you have given us topics for many other webinars, I think, for all those little pieces and parts. What I want to do is remind everybody about the chat. If you have any questions for any of our panelists today, to go to your chat, click on it, and then put in your question, and so that we could do our best to address those if you have any. But Joe, I was just thinking, like I said, you said so many things, but I'd like you to explain a little bit about what you meant with modern Christianity and ancient Christianity. Like we need to go back. Modern Christianity isn't going to fit or doesn't fit now.
Well, it definitely became, we spoke of the aristocratic captivity of the European church, where the bishops were all aristocrats, and that led to the loss of the working class in Europe. Now I think we have the bourgeois captivity of the American church, in which we really have lost the working class again. It's Hispanics are big, but they're flooding out because of spiritual emptiness in our churches into evangelical and Pentecostal churches as well. So our evangelization is falling down. I think the two things. I think we really have to go back to the original biblical roots. In this sense, I'm a sort of originalist in my hermeneutics of the Bible, because in the Constantinian turn in the 4th century, we began a major upside down turn of Christianity. The cross, which had been the symbol of Jesus being persecuted and killed by the Roman Empire, now becomes under Constantine the symbol of the Roman Empire persecuting and killing tribal peoples. And even Charlemagne, then he slaughters tens of thousands of Saxons to force them to become Christian. Then what the Protestants did in the Reformation in Ireland, under Cromwell, was unbelievable. It was another genocide, slaughter, and wiping out an entire culture. And then same thing was going on in Ireland was going on in the Americas as well, the slaughter of the Native Americans and so on and so on. And so Western Christianity has been, well, certainly from Constantinople, but it was the Roman Empire moved over there. But it's Western Christianity that became extremely problematic, getting worse and worse. So we have a problem not with Christianity. I think we have a problem with Western Christianity. And great resources for us are the Eastern churches. They never lost. The big thing that happened in the West, the ancient churches, even Augustine always used to say, God gave us two books, the book of the Bible and the book of nature. They're both revelations. And you can't read one without the other. You can't read the Bible without the book of nature as your horizon against it. But the West dropped completely the book of nature and made Christianity something eccentric and bizarre, you know, and almost meaningless. It's almost like if, you know, you have the society and you have a hospital for when people get sick. But if you think you're supposed to have everybody live in the hospital, that's kind of crazy, you know. It's redemption without creation. So the recovery of creation, which has began to happen. Actually, I've argued in my book on John the 23rd's Pacham Terrace that he began, and Mater and Mitzvah, and now a book I'm going to publish soon in Mater and Magistra. He began to recover the ecological sense there, but certainly it never took hold dramatically until Francis. But recovering the book of nature, and then secondly, two big aberrations came into Christianity in the wake of the Constantinian turn and into the medieval period. First, we created this thing called religious life. Now, intentional communities of widows and virgins and all these stuff, intentional communities are great, but they were never called in the early church religious life. But Jesus was a lay person, for heaven's sakes. He was a rabbi's lay. The Christian movement was explicitly lay for 300 years. What happens with the Constantinian turn? Constantine takes the bishops and they get all excited. He gives them buildings of the emperor, basileus, which is the basilicas, we would call them in English, the imperial buildings, and he gives all these privileges to the presbyters and then they, instead of calling them presbyters as the New Testament does, they get called priests like the Roman imperial priests were called, and they get all the privileges of the Roman imperial priest, and the laos then becomes the laikos as less than something which you were demoted.
Joe Holland.
Yeah.
I think what I'd like to do is, it's an abundance of richness. We have to have more webinars. We are pushing toward the conclusion of an hour. Joe Torma lost his connection, but he's on the phone. And I'm going to put up just one thing. And Joe, if you could very quickly just bring us back to fascism specifically. Joe has a little bit of a different take on it that he wants to comment on, and then Dan will move into any question and answer while saying to people if they need to leave they can, but we'll go on for perhaps
I'd just say one thing: the distortions of Western Christianity that identified the cross with the sword and later the machine gun, you know, and now with the nuclear weapons, you know, and became more aggravated with Calvinism. And what we're seeing is an extremely distorted form of Christianity that is totally under the Calvinist new right, into which many Catholic intellectuals and movements have been drawn, are actually fundamentally distorting the message of Jesus, and in a fascist way.
Okay, so Dan, let's see if you can hear Joe. Joe is on my phone, and Joe, if you'll say a few things, and we'll see if people can hear you.
No.
Louder, Joe. Try again.
No.
Okay, it's not working, Joe. So I have your slide up with regard to fascism, a way of organizing society ethnocentrically, competitively and dictatorially. And then Joe Torma has an alternative view of competition. We'll have to have Joe come back at a different time with a better connection. So I'm going to stop the sharing here, and Dan, move into whatever time you want to give to question and answer. I think we should maybe at 5 after give people that want to break away the opportunity. Those that want to continue the conversation, we can continue that.
Okay, can you put up the slide on what we can do? What can we do?
Yes, give me a moment.
Because that certainly is a question that's on my mind right now. I mean, Joe Holland, is voting in an election going to make any difference?
You want me to answer? Oh, yeah, definitely. Yes, yes. It's not perfect, but it's a buffer. It gives time and it gives opportunities for new things to happen. Yes, definitely.
Okay, good.
That's what you wanted, Dan?
Yeah, yes, it is. Yes, it is. So what can we do? And Joe and Mike, if either one of you want to comment on any of those, what can you do to prevent fascism? It says, read the Pope's encyclical. Pay attention to reputable voices. But I want to know, how do you know who's the reputable voices out there?
Well, I fear that even the communication groups, for instance, National Catholic Reporter, America, Commonweal, are still, teetering on the brink of the conversation we're talking about. Nobody can believe it. Nobody can say, "Oh gosh, we're going towards fascism." No. Well, when you learn more about the fascist playbook, you see what I saw, that it doesn't start by a takeover armed. It takes over your mind. It's a communication of what are you afraid of and who are you afraid of, and we'll help you get away from them and or get them away from you. And so you come in with us and we'll help you. So in other words, the fears of the people, the separation of the people is exactly what the fascists want. And that's what this government at the present time in the United States, I have seen in these last 4 years. The tendency to that. I had seen it when I first came back in 2012 with the separation of news commentary, of groups finding their groups and talking only with their groups. And then just coming back into my own city of Kansas City and all of the suburban areas around Kansas City and St. Louis, and across the country, the bubbles that Americans now live in. You can wall people off in your ghetto in the middle of the city, but the other people will kind of look and see, how high does your price for your home go, and how far can you get away from those poor people and bad people and people you don't want to go to your kids' school to get, to be living a safe and happy life in the suburbs or somewhere where you feel safe, because the city, in the inner city, doesn't feel safe anymore. You can't even get community there. So that's what I've seen in the United States since I've been back. And that's my problem. The playbook of fascism is to promote any and all of those social separations of people and groups, so they don't talk to each other. So they are afraid of each other. And I would fear that the bishops of the United States, and in general, many of the young priests whose education has been really on the side of a kind of papal orthodoxy, I don't think it touches the real life of people. And therefore, it's not a question of, we're losing people, they're not staying Catholic. No, we're not giving the mission and the teaching of the church to the people and bringing them together to reflect on it and act upon it. And so we allow the wealthy Catholics in one area and the very poor people in another area, and they'll give money to the wealthy, and many of them, of course, they are sincere and they mean well. But I'm just saying, the social networking of people different who might have to bump up against each other is just about broken down in the United States. The real estate ads you see in a Sunday paper in our area is all about how far can you get from the gunfire in the city that will bring Kansas City and St. Louis up over 100, 150 shootings and killings in the city, drive-by killings, and all the drugs that go with it. So if you can get away from that and live in your bubble, you don't have to worry about anything else. And you'll pay the police and the National Guard and the and the people we talked about in Portland, the national police without any badges or anything to come in and bring order if you're afraid. The problem is that the order, as we saw in Germany and Italy and Spain, is an order that will eventually bring you, at least if you ever go up against the order, to a very silent and very peaceful grave. I don't think that's what American democracy was ever about.
Joe, Mike, there was a comment here, but I'm really wanting your view on how can Catholic social teaching kind of keep from this apparent split that always happens. It's like the right wing is considered fascist and the left wing is considered communist. So, you know, how does...
Dan, I was the Secretary-Treasurer of all the National Catholic chaplains of the new National Catholic Chaplains Association. I was giving workshops at Harvard and Stanford and various places for Catholic ministry to university education before I went back, or went to Bolivia. I saw things happening then that I was afraid of, but I didn't put together. But right now, frankly, we're at almost, to me, a tipping point. I wish we could get there by dialogue. I'm not at all sure that we won't have the social breakdown. When I see the Catholic Bishops' Conference, who can't get together themselves, but also are separating Catholics, wealthy, progressive, conservative, can't get them together because the bishops are themselves the source of some of the divisions, we're in trouble. And I'm not sure there is a formula. I would hope that we can find a way out. Joe knows that Joe Holland knows, and people who know me know I am an old, second, third generation Irish Catholic optimist. I'm sure we can find a way out of this. I just don't know what it is at the moment. But being an optimist and looking at what I've seen since I've been back in this country, and particularly in the last few years, the separations and the divisions up to the highest level, the political parties, the universities, the churches, the leadership of the Catholic Church, I don't know that we can just get back together and talk about it and cure it. I fear that it will take a split and fighting before we get to where we have to go. Oh. I don't say that because I want it, and I'm totally opposed to it. I just don't see the avenues of dialogue that will take us out of our bubbles. We're separate, and we have built our own walls of separation. Yeah. Churches,
on that point, one of the questions that has come in is the question of progressive liberalism or left-wing kind of polarization versus right-wing polarization. Could one of you say more about the interplay of those
I think, Bob, if we are to follow the current strategy of Catholic social teaching, which, by the way, I don't think is well understood by most of the commentators on it, but clearly John the 23rd began a very different strategy, different than the Leonine strategy. But it's at a deep level of civilization. And in this framework, and this continues all the way through John Paul II and through Francis, that modern ideologies are bankrupt. That means liberalism and Marxism. They're both bankrupt. You're not going to build on either. Unfortunately, as Mike pointed out, most of the progressive American Catholic intelligentsia are still enmeshed in the liberal ideology, and that's their frame of reference, like the water the fish swims in. It's hard for them to imagine out of it. I think a prophetic figure who we could go back to study, who was in tune early on with this new strategy of Catholic social teaching before it emerged, was Peter Morin, co-founder with Dorothy Day of the Catholic Worker Movement. He felt that there was need to build a new civilization. And I would say as we take Catholic social teaching at its deep level today, there are three things in contention, but there's only one path forward. The three strategies in contention are restoration, which the right is trying to do, restore something and nostalgically that really never really existed. And then modernization, which the liberals are still trying to live in the modern world. And then thirdly, though, regeneration, because the life system is degenerating on the planet, and we need to regenerate the entire life system ecologically, sociologically, and theologically. But our entire intellectual infrastructure, our entire pastoral infrastructure, our entire political infrastructure, our entire economic infrastructure has not yet moved into that direction. So but the young people, I teach, I've gone back to teaching lately. I'm teaching 3 courses right now, a seminar in our law school and 2 undergraduate philosophy courses. But let me tell you, the young people are deeply tuned into this, but they're not finding any leadership for it. They're hungry, they're starving, they are deeply ecological. And my university is in Miami, Florida. They're well aware that Miami is doomed. It's going to be underwater in their lifetime. One of my law students, her boyfriend was trying to sell his house. And he said he couldn't even get no one would give him a mortgage anymore because of the danger of flooding. So we've really got to build with the young people. And we have to build in a way that provides them what Peter Morin would have called, you start with clarification of thought, deep thought. That's why I recommend those books. I know I talk too fast. A Jesuit once told me, listening to you is trying to drink water from a fire hose. He said. But so I do have a book.
Yeah, right.
I have a maybe incomprehensible book. If nothing else, it'll probably cure any problems with insomnia, but called Postmodern Ecological Spirituality. And I put a lot of my thoughts down there. They're immature, they're not fully worked out yet. It's an exploration, but if you wanted more on those thoughts, I would recommend it. But clearly, we can't, these terms right and left have no more meaning anymore. You don't want to be caught in either, I don't think. And so you want to build from the ground roots up about regenerating the ecosystem, regenerating family and community at the local level, and parishes could play major roles in that. But above all, in finding a deeper spirituality that is meaningful, which I would argue would be an ecological spirituality, retrieving it, what the ancient lay nature of the New Testament, and then, but also actually, we need to also probably create new forms of religious institution. Every stage in the church's journey, there's been some new religious form of institution that has helped to renovate it. First of all, the cenobitical communities, and then the monastic communities, and then the mendicants, and then modern apostolics, mostly women, by the way, who did tremendous work. But that's all, the apostolics are now in decline. That's not working anymore. We need what Peter Morin would have called a vision of a green revolution. He called it a new monasticism, which was lay in character, and you took the monastery out of monasticism, about rebuilding civilization. And people began to do that in the Catholic work in the Great Depression, but the World War II and the post-war affluence just kind of wiped it all out. But I think we could begin to build what would in effect be like a new global religious order, except it would be lay and it would be based on ecological spirituality and regeneration. For heaven's sakes, we're going to have already have millions of refugees across the planet. They need to resettle more towns and villages and develop a new way of life. So.
Just if I may just make a comment on that, we are going to have, hold on just a minute, Tony, we are going to have a webinar on Dorothy Day in November. So check that out on our website. Tony, go ahead.
Please, Joe, please repeat the title and then add the publisher of that book.
It's Postmodern Ecological Spirituality.
Yes.
And I have a different definition of postmodern than most academics, and it's published by Pachamenteris Press, and it's on Amazon. And it's also will be on that list of books that I'll ask Bob to send out.
Okay, well,
Excuse
this
me.
has been an incredible afternoon, and we cannot thank you enough for doing this. We've got a 2-minute video we want to show you just before we leave. It's to try to make this a little more light after being pretty heavy for most of the time here. So Bob, if you would, are you ready?
Yeah, give me 1 minute to get to the right place. Okay, I should be there momentarily.
All right, but thank all of you, Joe, Mike, Joe, and thanks everybody for being here. pay attention to our other webinars. I hope that you go to our website, AUSCP.org, and find something else that you might be interested in, and hope we see you again.
And here we go. Don't be a sucker. This is a 1947 film.
I happen to know the facts. Now, friends, I'm just an average American. But I'm an American, and some of the things I see in this country of ours make my blood boil. I see people with foreign money. I see Negroes holding jobs that belong to me and you. Now I ask you, if we allow this thing to go on, what's going to become of us real Americans?
I've heard this kind of talk before, but I never expected to hear it in America.
This fellow seems to know what he's talking about. What are we real Americans going to do about it? You'll find it right here in this little pamphlet. The truth about Negroes and foreigners. The truth about the Catholic Church.
Do you believe in that kind of talk?
All makes pretty good sense to me. And I tell you, friends, we'll never be able to call this country our own until it's a country without. Without what? Yeah, without what? Without Negroes. Without alien foreigners. Without Catholics. Without Freemasons. You know these people. What's wrong with the Masons? I'm a Mason. Hey, that fellow's talking about me.
And that makes a difference, doesn't it?
These are your enemies. These are the people who are trying to take over our country. Now you know them. You know what they stand for. And it's up to you and me to fight them. Fight them and destroy them before they destroy us. Thank you.
Before he said Masons, you were ready to agree with him.
Well, yes, but he was talking about, what about those other people?
But in this country, we have no other people. We are American people.
What about you? You aren't American, are you?
I was born in Hungary, but now I am an American citizen. And I have seen what this kind of talk can do. I saw it in Berlin.
What were you doing there?
I was a professor at the university. I heard the same words we have heard today. But I was a fool then. I thought Nazis were crazy people, stupid fanatics. But unfortunately, it was not so.
Thank you, one and all. I think that planted a lot of seeds. We'll try to carry this conversation further. So thanks to Mike Gillgannon. Thanks to Joe Holland. Thanks to Joe Torma. Unfortunately, his connection just fell apart. He was going to contribute as well. He's going to be central to the Dorothy Day webinar that is coming up in November, so give your attention to that. Anything else, Dan?
No. Thank you all. And thank you, Bob, for your technical work in the background.
Right.
Yeah, I try. Yes,
Thanks, everybody.
I try.
Good to see you, Mike.
Thank you all.
Thanks.